Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the St. Louis podcast for May 12th, 2023. I'm one of your glorious hosts, Garrett Atkins, the CEO of an award-winning and fastest-growing marketing agency, founder of the studio we are sitting in right now, chairman of a holding company that owns multiple home service companies, writer for Forbes.com via the Forbes Agency Council, and I'm alongside my co-host and business partner across a few of those companies, and he is a proud owner of a beard that commands respect, leaving even the wildest creatures in awe. Get ready for a roaring conversation today. Eric, how are you doing today, sir?
Thank you for the intro. And
You're welcome.
I just want the audience to know that I write those for myself, and I am in awe every week of the conversations.
The
that we
funny
have.
part is right before we start recording this podcast, Eric is making fun of me for having a beard. Or pardon me, mustache. Mustache. I can't grow out.
It's hardly
And
a
then
mustache.
I do him the solid of reading that and gross compliment about his beard. But I get ripped on for my mustache. That said, today we have Brent Cassity, an author, entrepreneur, and podcast host of Nightmare Success on the St. Louis podcast. And we're going to get into the weeds with him and his business. But before we do, this is the St. Louis podcast where each and every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, we drop an episode on all major podcasting audio and video platforms, such as Spotify, Apple, YouTube, major social media platforms, and more, where we meet with the most badass people and creators to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and current events. You can watch the show live or later on youtube.com/the St. Louis podcast, just like Katie Baker and Matt Parker are right now in the back. Now let's jump into it. Brent, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good, Garrett. I appreciate it. And I'm really admiring that mustache. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I came here completely with no facial hair whatsoever, trying to look as
professional as possible.
yeah. But the reason why is I can't grow a beard. I could grow maybe a goatee.
Yeah.
But a beard, I'm really jealous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my goal is just to look as homeless as possible today.
Yeah, that's right.
It's coming back though, right?
Yeah.
The mustache.
The mustaches are back, as
Yeah.
we were discussing before
Top
the
Gun.
podcast.
Top Gun, yeah.
No,
what's
it
the
is back.
actor's name in Top Gun?
Miles.
Yes.
Miles Teller.
Yes.
Yeah.
That man.
I knew that for some reason because I'm terrible with names, and I don't know why that popped out.
Oh, yeah. And one thing I actually forgot to do the last two episodes is in the back we have Katie Baker, who handles the social media for the St. Louis podcast, among other things she helps Eric and I with. And then we have
so
Matt.
if you ever get mad at the content,
Shut up.
you know Katie is the one viewing those comments, so quit hating her. DM it to Garrett if you have any issues with what we say on this podcast.
Yes. And then the other person in the back, since Eric decided to rudely interrupt, is Matt
That's
Parker.
Matt Parker, yes.
Matt Parker.
I am being held against my will.
You can't get out.
He's actually locked in there. He's lucky he has a window. So that said, anyways, if you want to go into the bio for
Yeah,
Brent,
we got Brent Cassity on the podcast today, former CEO of Forever Enterprises, author of Nightmare Success, podcast host of Nightmare Success. He grew Forever Enterprises from a regional company to a national company operating in over 22 states. Been recognized by the national media, Time, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, and more. HBO did a documentary that spawned the series 6 Feet Under and lost it all and served a 5-year prison sentence at the gates of Leavenworth Prison. Thank you for joining us today, Brent.
Thanks, Eric.
Was anything about that inaccurate?
No, I think that all sounded about right.
Okay. Well, tell us about your background and how you got started in the funeral industry with Forever Enterprises, and tell us what Forever Enterprises was.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll tell you a little background first.
Yep.
So I went to prison, so that's kind of a shocking topic. But I was not one of those guys that you hear you get this abusive, broken home that you grew up in, and I didn't. I grew up down the road here in Southwest Missouri in Springfield, and it was very normal. I had a neighborhood where you rode bikes and played out in the neighborhood until it got dark, and people picked teams, and had grandparents that lived on the farm down in Buffalo, Missouri, and that was fun. And so everything was pretty normal. And I had a dad, I kind of play into this story, who was bigger than life. I mean, as far as a guy that little town, valedictorian, won the state championship in basketball, went on to play D1 basketball at Missouri State, went to law school, graduated #1 in his class, zoomed out of there, won big cases, and then he became a guy with a golden touch and got into a lot of businesses. So when I was a kid, I was like, wow, I want to be him. That guy is exactly what I want to be. And at 8th grade, I was 6'1", thought I was going to be 7 foot tall, but never grew again. But I thought, I had NBA in my mind. And one night my dad, calls my brother and I in and says, boys, I've need to talk to you. He said, I've gotten into a heap of trouble here with the bank I own. And I'm getting federally indicted, and I'm going to do a plea bargain. And while he's saying this, I see his mouth moving, but it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, how could this guy who's got the golden touch, who's my idol, telling me he's going to plead and go to prison for a while, and the whole life I'm living down there is perfect?
Yeah.
So it happens. And by the time I get done him talking, he says, and by the way, we're going to move to just get a clean start. And we did. We moved to St. Louis, which seemed like a terrible idea at the time because I had all these friends down there. We moved to, the big metropolis of St. Louis and in the summertime. And the weird thing about when you move somewhere in the summertime, you're not going to school. So then everybody's coming up, in the neighborhood, and being nice and bringing stuff over. And like, my mom's not widowed. She's not divorced. So where's the dad? So at that time, you can't Google. So everybody knew everything back down the street in, Springfield. So we decided as a family that we were going to say that Dad was out of town working. And then we went to visit him on the weekends, which was all true. He was down at Marion, Illinois prison, and he did have a kitchen job there. And we did go to visit him every weekend. But I can say this. Going as a kid to a prison is a really weird experience. I remember thinking when I went down there, it's like, is he going to be like some kind of prison creature when he rounds the corner? He's going to have a prison uniform. Is he okay? And when I got there, he looked good, and he seemed like he was kind of in it. And, he was putting on the good face, brave face. But I remember the most important thing in my mind was when I left there, went to the parking lot, I thought, you know what, this will never happen to me. I was 15 years old. And at 47 years old, I was standing at the gates of Leavenworth with my dad, indicted and convicted with 4 other people. And so my life went from, I will never do this, it'll never happen to me. How could this, I'll never live my life that way. So when my dad got out, he had one.
What age were you when he got out?
15. He was in for about 6 to 8 months, so it wasn't a huge amount of time, but it felt like a lot of time.
Yeah,
15-year-old.
Still going to prison.
Yeah, but he had one company out of all the companies he lost because he put it in a family trust without him being in the attached to it as a beneficiary. And it was an unsexy company, but it solved a real need, and it was prearranging your funeral services before you die. So it took the burden off the family, taking care of your arrangements, prepaying, freezing the cost. And I never really thought I'd go into that business because, I was going to be this trial attorney. I took political science and took theater. And
so did you go to law school?
Well, here's the tricky point of that. When I was in college, I wasn't a 4.0 student, but I was a 3.4, not too bad. But I would register on the dumb scale on a standardized test. And at that time, they've changed it up a little bit with LSAT, but the standardized test, and I couldn't get past that damn thing.
I was the opposite.
You give me an opportunity, like in constitutional law, to write an essay for my grade, I can write all day. But standardized tests, I don't know what. I used to blame it on being left-handed, but I've run across a lot of really good left-handed attorneys, so that obviously doesn't have anything to do with it. So I had to figure out what I was going to do as a young kid, fork in the road. But I had been in sales, and I'd played, my outlet all through my world growing up was playing sports. And sales, when I was in college, kind of felt like sports. It didn't matter how old you were. If you were good, you played. And, it kind of had the rhythm of flow, the fact that, it's a scoreboard. You close, you win, you don't, you lose, and you can keep track. So I went to my dad, and I said, hey, I'm thinking, Dad, maybe to try. You'd be great. Dad was always my biggest cheerleader. So, we'd love to have you, and this would be great. And I said, but the problem is, I said, you carry such a big shadow. I said, is there any place I can go just to pass fail? Brent, see if I can do it. Oh yeah, he said you can go down to Austin, Texas. We just opened up that, and there's a funeral home down there you can represent. Go see what you can do. I said, man, I'll take it. Austin, Texas, at 22, 23 years old, I was all in. So I packed up, moved down there, and it fit in my wheelhouse. And I, at that young age, built a big region. And at that time, I didn't realize it, but Dad was more than in a family company. It's kind of weird being a family company. I don't know if I would recommend it because it's kind of like being in the Bee Gees or something. Everybody, who's the lead singer, you know, but we kind of, Dad wasn't really into the sales and operations thing, and I was. And so he threw the keys over to me at 25 years old and said, man, go grow it. And at that time, we had grown into an insurance company that funded our contracts for the prearrangements. And he wanted to do that. So we did do that. My brother came on, to answer your question, Garrett, forever became basically a passion of ours as a family because it started from finding a cassette tape of my grandmother who had died 3 years prior, and her voice was on there. And he found it, you know, and he was cleaning out his room, put it on, and we were around the table and said, wow, it's amazing. You know, she's only been gone 3 years, but you kind of forget the way she laughed, talked, the inflection in her voice. Why don't we have any more of this? You know, if you're famous, you know, Queen Elizabeth dies. If we just said Queen Elizabeth died and there was no follow-up, you'd say, well, where's the highlight film and where's all the stuff? So we expected of presidents and movie stars and famous people, but we don't do it for the grandparents. So we said, let's become the filmmakers for everybody else. So that got us into, we were already in the funeral business industry, but it got us into the cemetery business because that's where people went to remember. And the technology was we created a production studio where we go out and people who own cemetery property would go and film them, take them through their scrapbooks and have them talk about their life. And then we digitally preserve that, and it would be on the cemetery touchscreen console when you went to visit, and you could introduce one generation to the next. And there's an old Chinese proverb that says, when somebody dies, the library burns. And so we were going to be the library of lives. And that was kind of a sexy company because in the funeral industry, there wasn't anything being done different. I mean, for the last 100 some odd years, there wasn't anything done differently. And then these two kids come along, these guys, these, you know, young kids, and they're wanting to change everything. So it was covered, and we got a lot of press, you know, with just about anybody and everybody that wanted to talk about something that was new. So life was good. You know, it was, you know, at 40 years old, I had grown the company into, you know, multiple states. Forever Enterprises had grown and become, you know, kind of a national player.
How much revenue were you managing at that time, you think?
Oh, let's see. We had three different companies at that time. We had the pre-need company that did about 125, 130 million in sales a year. Then we had a medical malpractice insurance company that was really the company that nobody knew about that made the most money. And that company did about 50 million in premium. And it had 26 million in capital and surplus, 18 million in reserves. So it was a nice company. And the cemetery division, I can't really remember. It did, you know, we had 15 cemeteries, and through the Forever sales, we did well there. So we were doing well. I mean, I you know, at 40 years old, I thought I had accomplished it all. I was at country clubs, the kids were in private schools. I had a vacation home on the East Coast, and it was great. And then I was filling up my gas tank one day, and the president of our insurance called me while I was literally filling up my gas tank and said, Brent, I just got off the phone with a lady from Ohio, from the investigative division, that says she's got information that's going to bring our company down. And it was like, what? But there was something that kind of ran through me where I had felt this before when my dad told me at 15 years old that he was going to prison, and it felt the same, except I'm in it. So the short version of our story is that we had a reinsurance company. So we were a small insurance company. A lot of people, when they have small insurance companies, they get reinsurance from a much bigger company. This one happened to be the largest one in the world, headquartered in Germany. And we had cut a sweet reinsurance agreement. And all that means is I write the business, you take the liability.
Is it Munich?
What?
Was it Munich?
No, it's Hanover.
Hanover, okay.
So, you know, you get paid the commission, you keep
Yeah,
writing the business,
yeah.
and that's how it works. Not to get too far in the weeds on that. But They came back. They had taken a hit in the 9/11 market and wanted to renegotiate the contract. That was a really nice contract. My dad, being the guy he was, who back when he was, in his early 30s and said, "I'll run the bank and you run the government," this time said, as the attorney looking at the contract says, "No, guys, I don't think so. That's not in the contract. We don't have to renegotiate." And so that started a spiral of basically fighting against a size of a country. And our, discovery went from 2 million to 4 million to 8 million to 12 million. It started hitting our capital and surplus in our insurance company, which sends up smoke signals to all these states that you're in that they don't like that. And so that started a spiral of a nightmare that got more and more complicated. My dad came to me at some point and said, "Brent, we got to have a voice out there." And I was like, man, this was the one I wasn't paying attention to. And, as I sat, I was the president of the company of overall. So I just neglected thinking, I write the business over here, dump it over there. Everything is good. It had been for 30 years. So it wasn't like it was something that, something snuck up on us. But there's a lot of things that you go into the depths of, because you get audited every year, whatever state you're in. But people can have different opinions about what needs to happen and with policies and how those are handled and so on and so forth. We ended up in a nightmare and it started, and then it just didn't stop. It started with then us getting investigated by everybody. Then it started to feed into someone down in Texas where we were domiciled, took hold of the deal and said, we're going to put it in receivership. And once it went into receivership, it went into a spiral.
What's receivership?
Basically taking over your company and your assets and saying, we're going to operate this thing. And you
watch.
Like
a trustee?
Yeah. So you become a watcher, an observer of your own assets. And that, because we were a certain size company, it created a lot of press. That turned into a criminal investigation. And it then, from that point spiraled for 6 years of an investigation with 12 million documents. And at the end of it, it was me and my kids sitting down and them saying, "Dad, this has been a tsunami of bad. You can't go to trial." And for those that don't know, when you go in, especially in federal, what you do, the biggest thing they had me on is there was a law that was passed in 1994 that said that you could not have an ex-felon working in the business of insurance. The company started in 79, but I carried the title, so I was the responsible one to know the laws, even though we had attorneys and everyone else. I sat in the responsible position to know those laws, regardless if I have intent to evade them or not. That carried a 5-year sentence. So that's the one I couldn't get away from. It was, you could go to trial, but this, the instructions to the jury is he did it. The other ones where you just fall into the conspiracy, and it was, anything you put in the mail was mail fraud, anything that you wired was wire fraud, anything that you bought through your company for 30 years was money laundering. So then they stacked those charges, and, one night when I was having a good-sized drink of vodka, I started adding up, and I was looking at 995 years. And so those are stacked at 10 to 20 years at a time. And that's why my kids were saying, "Dad, you have to be insane we'll never see you again. All you have to do is lose one of these and you're gone for 10 or 20 years." I knew that. The thing that happens is when you get into these things, you go to bed fighting, you wake up fighting, and you almost get used to the adrenaline of the fight, even though it's not getting any better. And then when they tell you to turn the switch off, you're like, okay, I realize it's done. I'm tired. I can't believe I'm pretty much lost everything. But the one thing that happened to me that I thought was really, and I look back on it now, like I'm talking about somebody else. The night that I was supposed to plea, the next day, we had a family call, and it was my mom, my dad, my brother, and my wife and me, and we were just talking about how we were going to do this as a family, what was going to happen. And my kids were up at our vacation home. I was going to go, it was around 4th of July. I was going to go up right after I did the plea the next day. And so I got off the phone that night, and it occurred to me I had never contemplated that I'm going to be a felon. I'm going to go to prison. And not only that, but for the rest of my life, I'm going to be an ex-felon. Like, how do I live that? I hadn't even contemplated this. And now I'm going down tomorrow to put myself through this. And then some weird things happen to you. You see these guys, that drive into walls and do whatever. I was alone drinking, and I got out a sheet of paper and started writing, that, all the people have been great to me, all the, the best people, all my friends, and how my wife had been a warrior through this whole thing and had been the best, support, my kids, all the best advice, and had another drink, finished off this letter, had another drink, and I grabbed the keys, went to the garage, and I didn't know if I was going to go hit a tree or just let the car run. And it was literally like something like a bolt hit me. It's like, Brent, what the hell are you doing, man? You're the glass half full guy. I mean, this would be the worst legacy that you could leave your family as stepping stage left on this deal. What were you thinking? And at that moment, I really realized that there was a huge difference between being a victim and a survivor. A victim, you lose all your strength, you curl up, you get in a fetal position, you let people kick you in the corner. Survivor even makes you feel different when you say it. And at that point in my life, I said, well, regardless, and I had some really bad things coming up. I was going to go plea. I was going to go be sentenced. I didn't know how long, and I didn't know what prison I was going to. So there were some scary things, but I said to myself, regardless of what happens from here on out, I'm going to make my family as proud as they can be of how I'm handling this. So it made it easier for me at my rock bottom moment before I had gone to prison, because I kind of dealt with, what I'm doing. And when I stood at the gates of Leavenworth, man, it'd take your breath away. The place looks like it was built in 1879. It's a monstrosity of horrible looking. And when you stand at those gates, you're by yourself. The wind's blowing through on January 14th, 2014, and it's in Kansas, and you're just waiting to go in. And the thing that I was thinking is everything that I know, everything I love is behind me, and everything in front of me is the unknown. But you got to have a strategy walking through that. And I had thought a little bit about that. So walking in, even though I was scared to death, walking in, I really realized that a lot of the things that I had done in my life, I was going to try to implement and reset my goals in a very strange environment, primitive, strange environment.
Yeah. What was one thing is, wow, holy fuck, what a story. But two, what was the first part of that strategy as you walked in the prison?
One of the things I learned, especially walking in an environment like that, is that it does no good to be talking. It's very easy to humble yourself going into prison because they prisonize you. I mean, for the first 4 hours, they put you in a cell and they take all your clothes and they look at you and do all the stuff that you feel like you're an animal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you get through that. So you don't have any trouble getting humbled. But what I did is I looked around once I got down to where, so I went, they process you through the USP, and then they take you, if your points are such, so you can go down to the camp. So once I got there, my big thing is that I really needed to find out who was getting it right, who was doing things that I would do, like who had a good prison job, who was working out because I wanted to get in the best shape of my life, who was reading books, and how could I get those books? What were people doing? Because there's only two types of people in prison, the guys that are trying to get by and the ones that have given up. And, it's kind of like that famous line in Shawshank, get busy living, get busy dying. That's kind of all there is in prison. You're either getting it and trying to get through it, or you've given up, and you can see both while you're in there. So I really humbled myself into trying to find the people who were making it work. And I was lucky with the guy that I first met, who was my bunkmate, Roma, he was a shot caller for the Texas Homeboys. He was this little boxer guy, and he just took me on. He just said, "Hey, you don't look like you've been here before, Cassity. You're going to need a lot of help." and he started helping me. He took me and made my, he said, "You got to make your bed military style. Here's how you do it. Don't put anything in your locker yet." Because you get down to a bunk bed, a plastic chair, and a locker is what you have. and he helped clean out the locker. And then he took me across the way and he said, "Clark, meet Cassity. Cassity, meet Clark. He's one of you. Do you help him?" And strangely enough, I find out that Clark, 8 years my senior, was a basketball player at DeSmet, just like me. And we connected. A guy from St. Louis went to the same high school as me. And then from that point forward, I kind of had two connections that kind of helped me in my world. And I remember that night, I was in bed, after you go through this 6-year journey, I was like, man, I'm here. I am in Leavenworth prison.
Yeah. How long were you in prison?
I had a 5-year sentence. I was able to take a program that you have to get accepted into, that was called RDAP, that I was able to get a year off. It's a 9-month intensive program. That's the only thing that allows you off.
What is this program?
So what it does is it's a program basically to try to decrease recidivism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's based around, there's a lot of people in federal prison that are related to drugs because, most of the serious violent crimes are state. I think there's 2.5 million people in your state prisons, and there used to be 300 or 400,000. I think there's like under 300,000 now federal. But so your rapists and murderers and those people are state because you don't cross state lines to do that. But in federal, you have to cross state lines for a federal charge, which is that really scoops up a lot of people that are in the drug world. So by percentage, there was a lot of guys in there that were, drug dealers, but there was a good percentage of them that were guys that just had trouble with drugs, that they were selling drugs to take drugs. And so they were easy to scoop up. So RDAP was a program of rational thinking, behavioral thinking. And so it really wasn't a bad program, but my world was I was going to get into that to get a year off. And when I got into it, the guys that were in it, it was like, everybody was joking, you fake it to make it to get your year off. But, in the end, I was nominated with my group to speak at our graduation thing. So I took it and thought, this had some value to it. And I still do think that program done the right way is one thing in the BOP system that's probably not a bad thing if it's done and taught properly.
Yeah. So on a day-to-day basis, you said you had a job in there.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
I had a good job.
So what was your job in there?
I got to be a clerk at the food warehouse. So we fed close to 2,200 people a day, and these food warehouses are gigantic. I mean, the freezer is the size, of a building that, you keep it, minus whatever 7 degrees. But I got forklift certified. I was lucky the CO that was our correctional officer that was our boss, basically. I got along with him. And so that was good for me because it really, it ate up time. And we had a big garden because Leavenworth's like this huge monstrosity of a campus. And so they grow food. And one of the things that we did is I was responsible for is we had hundreds of thousands of, watermelons and everything else that we grew. And so I would measure that out every week. And then the people from the city that would give that food away would pull up in their trucks and I'd load it. But I liked that because it was like the one outlet that I had, I could talk to normal people.
Yeah.
The other job that I had, which you guys probably won't believe, is my goal when I got there is I found out that there were behind Leavenworth Prison was Fort Leavenworth, and it's like a city within a city, but it had a golf course, and there were 4 guys from the Leavenworth Prison that could go work over at that golf course. So my goal from the first month I was there was how do you get to the golf course?
How do you get to the golf course? Yeah.
And after about 1.5 years that I was there, I was able to get the golf course job. And man, that was awesome. We get up, leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. The superintendent from the golf course would come pick us up, take us all the way around. So we got to drive on Metropolitan Avenue, see the real world going on. And they drive us through and into the Fort Leavenworth. And We got on, and I learned how to do things on a golf course.
Yeah,
that
what'd you do on a golf course?
I did.
I worked on a golf course, so
Well,
that's why I'm curious.
I loved it too.
It wasn't a bad job.
No, and if you could make money at it, it would be fantastic. I learned how to do everything. I mean, more or less, once you get there, and these guys are just maintaining along with the assistant superintendent. And I learned how to cut tee boxes and greens and fairways and rough, and we cut down 56 trees one winter. I learned how to do just about everything that you could do. And if you knew me before, my friends would say, "Oh my God, Cassidy, I can't believe they allowed you to drive any of that." And it was all new equipment too. I mean, it's all Toro new. They only keep stuff for like 3 or 4 years and rotate it. So it was fantastic. And the way we got paid is there was a bowling alley next door to the golf course, and we had $9.95 that we could spend a day. And I've never met a bowling alley menu that I don't like. So that's how I survived that world. And I didn't realize that I was doing intermittent fasting at that time.
Yeah.
But I would eat that big lunch and not do the go run for dinner and get in lines and see people getting fights and all that stuff. So that's the time that I worked out because nobody else was around. So I definitely had my routine and lived through that routine for a while. And the other thing I want to say too is I was really one of the lucky ones. There's so many people that I met that when I say I lost material possessions, I did, but I didn't lose my family. My wife, I've known since she was 13, I was 15, and we've gone through every life stage together. But she came every weekend, and it was unreal because there were guys, for most part, that didn't get any visits.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that allowed me to straddle the fence to the rest of the world and stay plugged in.
She ever miss a weekend?
Just when it was bad weather. It was crazy. It's 4.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
And my kids were going to school at Mizzou, so she'd pick up whoever would get in the car, and so I would see them through the month. And for us as a family, that was the way that our new weird normal worked. And went on for years, but we made it through it. And there's so many guys that I saw that just lost connection to everything on the outside world, which was so sad because that makes your time harder, and that what you have to figure out other ways to make things work.
Yeah. So over the years of managing Forever Enterprises, you managed, and the other two companies, you managed effectively hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Now, that said, your pastime was business. Do you think your experience in business helped you at all throughout that 5 years in prison?
Oh, I do. Yeah. Because I think, one of the things I talk about if I go speak, I've been to the business school down at Mizzou 3 or 4 times as a speaker. And I give out my 5 tools of what worked. Because when I say humble yourself and look for advice and look for people out there that are getting it right, I did that when I was in my 20s as a young executive. Like I'd read something and think, man, that's cool. I could implement. I'm going to give that guy a call. And it was surprising to me how many people would pick up the phone and talk to me because they were doing like cool stuff and they wanted to talk about it.
How did you get their contact in that case?
You had to search for it. Back in that day, that would have been in the 90s. You had to you could contact the person who wrote the article. You could go about it a couple of different ways. You couldn't Google, but for the most part, you could usually find somebody through connecting dots. And then, one of the greatest contacts I ever made was this guy, Old Man Flanagan, that was out on the West Coast, and he was in his 70s, and we became like a grandfather type thing. And he just turned everything over and said, hey, go to it. And we kept in touch, and I was able to grow quite a bit. And I always say it's kind of like getting the answers to the test before the test. If you'll go find somebody who's already doing it. And it also takes out that fear factor of, boy, I hope this works. No, this guy's already made it work. Now you just need to implement it in the exact same system.
Yeah, it gets rid of the unknowns.
Yeah, and monitor that. The second thing, if we want to go into that, second thing I use is just as a prison or in life, the Andy Dufresne had it right when in Shawshank, the Zihuatanejo. His Zihuatanejo in Mexico, he would chip through that wall every night for, 19, 20 years in the hopes that he was going to escape that prison. And in his daily reward was he had holes in his pockets and he'd let that wall out like, I'm getting it, I'm doing it. And if he talked about Zihuatanejo, he was saying, you know, it's the bluest of the blue waters, the whitest of the white sands. I'm going to fix up the old boat, take my friends out for fishing, and then we're going to watch the sun go down on the little inn I fix up at the end of the day. That kept him focused and motivated. And I think even in prison, you have to have goals set so that you know that you're walking through and you're knocking it down, so that you yourself still feel like you're doing what you're supposed to do. The other thing is in prison you can't look like 3 years ahead or 5 years ahead. It's overwhelming. But you really shouldn't do that a lot out here. My mantra was, win the day, one day at a time. Life's not fair. Make a difference regardless. And my youngest daughter made a calendar every year while I was in, and it had the family pictures in it. And every night I would take my pen and write in the little square and what was my win for the day. And if I didn't have a win, because sometimes you don't, I would let myself go down all the way down, like fill it to my soul bad day. But my mind hack is I'd never fill in 2 boxes of bad, because I knew if I did that I was going to on a slippery slope and it could turn into a bad week,
negative
month.
Feedback, right?
Yeah, and then you get institutionalized. Then you're fearful of all things around you. The fourth thing is you got to learn from your mistakes. And I made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes, but the world that we live in right now, everybody's so afraid to make mistakes. And if you read all the great titans of industry, all these guys with all their books made mistakes. They just learned from them, got wiser, and improved on it. And that's such a big deal. Is that you can't fear mistakes. You just have to take action. And as long as you're taking action with it, you'll be able to figure it out and improve on it. But don't get paralyzed on the fact, if I do this, what are they going to think? What if I make a mistake? And the final thing is that don't give up, don't give in, keep being yourself regardless of the circumstances. Otherwise, you will lose what makes you you. And what I saw in prison was people, because of the environment, would start acting different, doing different things, and not being themselves. And what happens with that is that you become your environment, you become institutionalized, and you see somebody lay hands on somebody, that's like 3-4 months out, just because their ugly routine, what they've gotten used to. They hate it. They're in prison, but it's more familiar to them than freedom, and they'll do something to stay in the ugly routine. And how many times do we see that out here, where somebody misses a job opportunity or something entrepreneurially? If I would take that risk, man, I could make it, because that's what I want to do. And the thing that you have to avoid is what I always think, and where I'm at now, I'm 56 years old. I think I've got a great second kick in me. You don't want to be the 85-year-old rocking in your rocking chair saying, man, I just watched on the sidelines my whole life. I could have gotten in the game. You don't want that, because there's nothing you can do about it then.
Yep.
So, if you can just do the 5 things that I'm talking about here, there's a pretty good chance that you can survive a nightmare, and you can build a business too, because all those different things I just said are things that I used to work myself into growing a business. And in prison, setting goals in prison was a big deal for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So when did you figure out in prison that kind of what your goals are when you got out? I'm assuming you had some of that stuff laid out.
I did, because my goals going into prison were simple. I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. I'm going to read as many books as I've ever read. I'm going to get a good prison job. I'm going to get into that thing where you can get a year off. I'm going to figure out how to communicate with the outside world. All those things were things that I did that night when I was in my bunk bed and looking up at that hill with all the lights on, saying, I got to get my shit together. This is a bad place. But walking the fence, there were a lot of things that happened, you've got time to think. I probably walked 6 to 8 miles a day. And so you're thinking, and I had a couple of guys that were, of a business background that we talked, stuff. And I started thinking about, what am I going to do? Because this is as bad as I'm walking the fence of Leavenworth. This is really bad. This is as bad as it can get for a downtime, a failure of being somewhere you're not supposed to be. So I started thinking, what's the best thing I could do? So I thought, the best thing I could do is use this journey that I've been on and help people get unstuck. Because so many people, and my mind thought, okay, I'm in prison, but so many people are in prisons in their own mind from a bad job, a bad childhood, the parents got divorced, health crisis, all those things. What gets people over the hump? And I started thinking about, what does it take to get over the hump? And that's where I came up with the nightmare success coined phrase is that anything you want to do in life to set yourself free to whatever you want, you're going to have to walk through some scary stuff out of your comfort zone into up and around and over your nightmares of whatever you fear. And if you can get there, then you actually have that freedom of, I can get this. I can do what I need to do. And nightmare success became my mantra of, I'm going to write the book, which I did. But then when I got out and the book was done, started getting on podcasts and stuff, I thought, well, man, I had to carry on with this and actually have a podcast of my own.
So you started writing that in prison then?
I actually didn't write it in prison. A lot of thoughts went into it in prison.
Okay.
But that's a good question, Eric. The reason I didn't write it in prison, because I really did think about it. But I thought, I want to be away from it to be able to reflect back on it in a way that when I'm in it, I might think differently than when I'm out of it. And so I waited until I got out to start writing. And that's a process all in itself. I mean, writing a book, I literally you write every day for a while and you just kind of become part of that. And then you've got yourself something, and then everybody starts tearing it up.
Sure. Well, real quick, on that note, since you're not listening to this episode via our Patreon, you have to listen to a word from our sponsors. Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our sponsor, Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee. Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance is recruiting agency owners here in St. Louis.
That's right, Garrett, and everyone knows what Farmers Insurance is, and if they don't, they will now.
Yes, it's kind of a household name. That said, as many of you know, a large part of our audience is made up of badass business owners, entrepreneurs, and top producing sales professionals with an open mind like yourself. Farmers Insurance is currently searching for driven individuals who aspire to own their own business or already own their own business and want to add another income stream to join the Farmers Insurance brand and own their own insurance agency.
This is a stellar opportunity to build your own insurance agency from scratch, take over an existing agency, or if you're just a slow roller, we know you, the guys out there and ladies, get paid to train under an existing successful agency owner before starting your own.
Holy shit, Eric. That means that whether you have experience as a business owner or you've never heard the word business before in your life, there's a pathway to owning your own business through Farmers Insurance Agency led by Mark Lee.
That's right. You can become a Farmers Insurance business owner even if you've been homeless in the past, just like you.
Yeah, thanks.
If you've ever dreamt of being your own boss, building a team under a reputable brand, and making a difference in your community by offering top-tier auto, home, and commercial insurance to consumers and businesses in your area, Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the godlike man himself, Mark Lee, has the perfect opportunity for you.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com to speak with Mark Lee, the district manager of Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, to become a Farmers Insurance agency owner today.
Did you hear that, St. Louis? Go visit insurancecareerstl.com. Insurancecareerstl.com. That is INSURANCE. Career, CAREERSTL.com.
To become a business owner today, again, one more time, visit insurancecareerstl, as in St. Louis.com today, right now, this second, or reach out to us at stlouispodcast.com and we'll introduce you to Mark Lee ourselves. And I promise he won't spell out insurance and career to you.
Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. Thanks for listening to that word from our sponsor, Farmers Insurance of St. Louis. That said, Brent, you have a podcast and you had a book, and they're both by the same name, correct? Which is Nightmare Success.
Yep.
Tell us what that podcast is about.
So it's about talking to guys that have experienced prison and we talk about their life before prison, their nightmare of when they end up in prison, and then their reentry into life. And the purpose of the podcast is kind of a couple of different layers here. One is that I'm trying to break the narrative that you don't. The narrative is that you always go back to prison, and there's nothing good that happens when you get out.
Yeah.
And there's the statistics are really bad. 2/3 go back in 3 years, 3/4 go back in 5. So the recidivism
That's
rate
crazy.
is bad. But there's success stories in there because there's 25 million ex-felons in the United States. So there are success stories. So my purpose of what I want to do with the podcast is, one, break the narrative to see that these guys that are on this podcast are making things happen. They're being a success. They're being their own personal success. And that podcast goes into 275 prisons in the United States also. And it's a message of hope, of overcoming, and that you really can make it. For the people sitting at home or riding in their cars, it's more about, hey, I'm stuck. Maybe I can use this strategy when I'm thinking about doing this because that's what he did and he made it and he went and did this. And the third thing is that when you aren't familiar with people who went to prison, you kind of wonder, like, what are they? Are they some kind of, prison creature? What do they look like? How do they act? And hopefully by these stories, people can say and see that maybe some of these people are a lot like me. Maybe I didn't make that mistake. Maybe I made another mistake and didn't get there where those guys got to, or these women did. But hopefully maybe when I look at somebody and not by the book cover, but and really listen to the story, you give them a second chance. And if we have a situation where more people are given second chances out there, that also helps with the recidivism rate. I've been very lucky in linking and conversing with these guys that all across the United States, there's different pieces of people that are doing really good things. Off the top of my head, Honest Jobs is a great success story of Harley Blakeman, who, Ohio State kid, graduate, got out, couldn't get a job, so he created a company where he vets these guys, and then when these companies, and I think there's I can't remember, 1,300 companies that are involved in this, he gets them into their second chances, and it's a great connection. So there's a whole bunch of situations like that, and my ultimate goal is to put an umbrella over the United States to where these good things are going on and they're linked, and guys can go in and actually find help and get help with places to live and jobs and get credit for their cars and all those different things to get back into the world.
Well, that's badass. You said got the podcast in over 250 prisons, right?
Yeah.
That said, have you ever received communications from some of the people in prison about, liking or disliking the podcast?
I can see the dashboard. And I'm working on trying to get the communication back and forth so that we can actually discuss. I can see that 8,000 to 10,000 people are listening to this, and so it is infiltrating. And these are in state prisons, so they can buy these tablets that look like iPads, and then the prison is the one that funnels that information in there. So I can see the dashboard and see the listens and see who they like listening to, and there's thousands of listens a month. So that, in effect, is a full circle for me, that I can feel like I'm helping in some way. And if it only helps one guy, that he's down and out and whatever, and he's given up on himself and life, he hears a story of somebody who's making it, maybe somebody even new, and he jumpstarts himself back into the world.
Yeah, talk about taking over a niche. How did you get that podcast put in the prisons?
Well, it was connecting the dots again. I had a guy who he's more or less known as the prison education czar for the prisons, Travis Ritchie. And he did time in prison, white collar guy. And I had him on the podcast. And as we got talking, his prison curriculum is in the prisons. So I said, Travis, how'd you get in there, man? What's going on? Can I get in? And he said, oh yeah. He said that they would love to have a podcast like yours, along this, genre. And so it's called the Adobe platform. And so you get in and on that platform. It's a whole different world too. Like, and I know when you have your RSS feed, you hit your button and it distributes out and it's done. On the Adobe platform, I actually have to work off of a spreadsheet and take it all and then it sends to them, and we all have the same spreadsheet, and then it funnels into their world. It's not as easy, but once you're on the system, it's all good.
Sure.
But I love it.
Yeah. Well, how long have you been doing the podcast? How many episodes are you in?
I think, interviews I've done, I think 85 or 86. I think published I have 70, I think 77th will be this week.
Nice.
So it's been since November of 2021, October 2021.
Why did you start it? So I guess you got out of prison when, in 2019?
I got out I actually got out at the end of November of 2016.
Oh, 2016. Okay.
Yeah.
Why'd you wait 5 years to start the podcast?
A couple of different things. When you first get out, I think it's more of like, Garrett, you're thinking, I gotta get my shit together. I gotta get this prison rust off of me.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough that I had some friends that gave me jobs to get back into, and I really just kind of wanted to get my feet under me. I started writing the book, I think in 2018 or 19, and it took about a year to do that. So I kind of took it in stages. Get yourself together.
Sure.
Get the prison stuff. It doesn't ever leave you, but you definitely get more and more in the feel of the world. And so I gave my time to do that. And then I did the book, and then I did the podcast, and it kind of all flowed out.
The day you got out, how good did that feel?
It was unbelievable. And the reason it's unbelievable, you don't really believe it until it really happens, because it's like you're there the whole time and you see guys go home, but it's like until they actually put the release thing on the board and say, you're released, and they give you your clothes. And that's one of the weirdest things, Garrett. They give you your clothes and you put your clothes on in prison, and you're the only guy that has street clothes on in prison. And, I'll tell you that the other thing about that is that you've got this, when you walk in alone, and there's, it's a lonely thing. And it's just like, the movies, everybody gathers around and see, okay, who's that guy? And that's the way that it is, because you're going to be living with those people for years. But it's so different when you walk out. You got guys cheering you on and slapping you high fives, and they're really happy for you being out. And such a different way to go out. But going out to that car with my family there and us jumping in the car together, and it was, I always say when somebody goes to prison, their whole family goes to prison, and each one of my girls, had to figure out their life and how they were going to live through this, and my wife the same way. And I think we felt like a real sense of accomplishment, as strange as that sounds, that we made it. And
yeah, no kidding.
When we drove out of there, it was, man, we can't get out of here fast enough. But the funny thing is that we stopped off at a Quick Trip, and everything moves so fast when you get out that, I was walking around and seeing all this stuff that you could just pull off. And I was standing at the cashier there, and I think it was Courtney, my oldest daughter, said, Dad, you got to pay. And I hadn't paid anything for years. So I was like, yeah, I don't know if I have any money on me or whatever, but the whole world, you're right back into it. So you have that, it's like an electric shock.
Yeah.
And driving down the road at 75 miles an hour is a rush also, because you don't move that fast.
Yeah, no
I
kidding.
can't imagine the guys that are in there for 20, 30 years and getting out. I had a guy on the other day that said he got sick. He got motion sickness. They had to pull over on the side of the road because he just, he'd been in there for 27 years. He couldn't.
Had it been in a car for that long.
Yeah. Went into 95 and got out in 2021. That'd be a long time.
Oh my God. That would be a trip.
Wouldn't it?
The world's changed.
Yeah, to hear him talk
especially nowadays, from the 90s to now, just with social media, society in general, politics, everything. Just
Nothing
the
to
way
that. 1995.
That's crazy. Well, let's scoot back a little bit. So you were running a business for quite some time before you ended up on your journey in Leavenworth, correct?
Yeah.
That said, what are some of the best? Obviously, there was a bad ending to that business.
Yeah.
But that said, there's probably a lot of really valuable lessons learned before then. in running the businesses? What do you think is some of the, I know you had those 5 things you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, but besides that, what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned from your time running the company on the business side?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned is the first $100,000 in volume is always your hardest, whatever you're building. And the reason I say that is that it takes that amount of time to figure out your system. And if you get a good training system and a good system that you can duplicate, then you can take that and duplicate it over and over
True.
and over again. And I think for me, as a young kid learning that you don't think about, oh my God, I'm going to make it national. You think about, how can I take what I'm doing and implement whatever is going on out there into this that's already working and actually make it a system that I can teach people, that they understand the mantra of what we're doing, that we're selling, because we really had to sell a vision. We were more or less revolutionizing the way people remembered a life. So, we had to create disciples to that of, people that really believe that in this weird business, it could be something totally different. Thus the name Forever. We named the company Forever because everything had an ending, and our way and the way we were branding things was that Forever Enterprises didn't. You were carrying their story on forever, and it was going to be and mean something much different than it had in the past. So I think my biggest thing to tail that to is action is so much more important than perfection. You can take action, and in more times than not, you're going to correct it, and it's going to evolve. But don't worry about perfection, because while you're worrying about perfection, somebody else is taking action.
Yeah.
And at some point, somebody might even take your idea. So it's important, if you think you've got something, take action with it, worry about getting it and improving it as you're doing it, not come out with this beautiful business plan that is, gold and you just think it's the best thing ever, but you've spent forever on it and you've never gotten started. For any entrepreneur out there, the most important thing is have a goal and a plan, but you have to take action with it. And if you take action with it, you will, with your duplication of your system, you'll start creating dollars.
What do you think is the most, well, one, I completely back that up on both things. One, creating systems that can be easily used in different circumstances and duplicate those systems. Systems are the difference between a multi-million-dollar company and something that's 6 figures in perpetuity. And then also taking action. I mean, for example, I can't tell you how long I waited to actually consistently make content on social media, and I still struggle with it because of perfection.
Yeah.
I always feel like this could be better, that could be better. I need to get verified on every platform first. I need to have all the right video equipment before I start making video on a consistent basis, when in reality, just starting and doing is going to make you better through failure.
And it'll grow.
Yeah, it'll grow. So yeah. No,
and
totally.
the other thing I think too is you don't be afraid to be the one leading the charge where you're a little bit different. We were in the funeral business, and man, there was nothing going on different. I've got old articles where I had funeral directors that were in the same article as me saying, I would never do that. That's like sacrilegious, or there's no way that a highlight film should be in a funeral home or at a cemetery. And you can't take that and believe that if you really believe what you're doing is the right thing and the passion of change. So, you can be talked down by a lot of people because they don't want to change. They never have changed, and they're in their own lane. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, there's going to be a lot of naysayers saying, man, he's crazy.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be doing that. I don't know what in the world he's thinking. And if that is meaningful to you, it'll probably derail you.
Yeah. So you were in prison for about 5 years. What was the biggest head trip or change that you experienced when you got out? Because, I mean, from 2000, when did you go in?
14.
14.
So I actually did, because I took the year and you do 84%, I ended up doing about 3 years.
3 years, okay.
Leavenworth. The biggest, well, there's a couple of different things. I might have been somebody that judged people by the cover of the book. And going through the experience that I've been through, I would say that's the biggest change in my mind after getting out is I really want to hear the story. I want to hear what happened, how it happened, why you are who you are, and to me that is the because there were some really good people I met in prison. I always say that that people say, well, that sounds weird. No, there really was, and the other thing I can say is nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out to be, not even prison. And so many people have these big, gigundous things, and even prison, I had built it up so big and I was so worried. And I got through it because it wasn't as bad as, I thought I was going to get raped and killed and stabbed. I was in a couple of fights, which were strange, but I hadn't been in a fight since I was like a 7th, 8th grade. But even at that, I didn't get raped or killed or stabbed.
Sure.
But, the thing coming out too is when you come out back into society, there's, things change. I mean, my wife was paying the bills now, and you worry about, it's not easy coming back. People look at you and say, God, you got to be so excited being out and being home. I said, absolutely. It's the best thing ever. But the whole time that you're doing that, you've got 1,000 things going on in gears in your mind of, what if, when I walk in the room, what are people, are they going to approach me and talk to me about that? I hope they do. So we don't act like it's, the elephant in the room where, how am I going to get the job?
Sure.
What am I going to do? How am I and when I get back into the family, I want to be normal. I don't want them to think I've changed. You've got all these things going on in your mind. And I think that's the thing you want to get, time to get your feet set and stepping. And, even in the small amount of time that I was in, and that small amount of time, the technology of people looking at their phones, that was like the biggest thing. Is like, I remember coming home and we'd be watching TV and my girls were looking at their phones and watching TV. That was never going on just in that time span.
Yeah.
That whole thing was, I can't imagine what it would be from 95 to 2021 trying to get back into that gap, if that was what it felt like to me. But I think the biggest thing is when you get out of prison is don't try to overdo it. You just need to be yourself, take it on one day at a time. Don't try to get too far ahead of yourself and you'll be all right.
Yeah. 2014, 2017, that would have been quite the change, because even though that we had smartphones ever since 2007, and they were pretty widely adopted by 2012, 2013 worldwide.
I think I was the last person to give up my BlackBerry, though. I love that
you?
thing. Yeah, and I finally poured a Diet Mountain Dew on accident and it quit. And everybody's saying, you got to get an iPhone. So I think it was like 2012 or 13 before I went in that I had the iPhone 6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, I held off from the iPhone up until like a couple summers ago.
Oh, so you really played it out. Yeah.
No, I really did. I stuck with the Androids for a while there. And I wish I would have given up sooner.
But isn't that a great story about BlackBerry? I mean, BlackBerry basically controlled the world.
Yeah.
And they crashed and burned because they just sat by and watched.
They refused to adopt.
Yeah.
So here, one sec, let me scroll down. So we have just a little bit of time left here, but I wanted to touch on a couple more things. So there was a documentary on HBO. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was called The Young and the Dead. And I was scared to death to do it. My brother wanted to do it. HBO came to us and said, man, you guys are doing some really cool things. We just bought Hollywood Forever Cemetery out in Los Angeles. And we bought it out of bankruptcy. It's a really cool cemetery. It's connected to Paramount Studios, literally on the same block. We're 62 acres or 62 acres. So they came to us and we were doing all this stuff that was different. And they were there for about a year and more or less captured all the stuff that I didn't think they would. It was actually a good documentary. And the piece that on the 6 Feet Under piece is kind of interesting is Alan Ball, who had come off, at that time, I think he had won an Academy Award or something. American Beauty, I think is what it was. And he was wanting to do a series that was different than what had been done. And so he saw the Young and the Dead, and he thought maybe I can make it normalized to where it's a family in a business and we follow it like we've done with any other TV series. And that's how that thing came about. And then my brother actually became part and giving them show ideas and wrote a little bit in there. So there's pieces of my brother in that 6 Feet Under, and all when they had the wrap party, it was at Hollywood Forever by the lake, and they buried all 6 seasons right there at the lake.
Damn.
It was kind of cool.
No, that's super cool. How was it to watch that for the first time?
Well, I'll tell you, that was weird. I'll tell one thing I did forget to say, Garrett. I got to see something in prison, which nobody usually gets to experience. Is my family was on American Greed, and I was notified by my brother that we were going to be part of that episode about halfway through my sentence. And so one night we were sitting in there, and everybody has headphones, and so you can see all these different TVs. You can't hear anything, unless you have the earphones on. And so these guys always watched American Greed on Thursday nights, and all of a sudden the big thing comes up of my family and us and this and that, and like, hey, that's Cass. So I had a whole week to stew, worry, and I knew nothing ever good was on American Greed. What's his name, Stacy Leach or whatever his name is.
No idea.
He makes anything sound ominous and horrible. And I talked to my bunkmate, and I said, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, should I go walk the track? Or he said, you can't do that, Cassidy. You just got to sit there and take it. And it was the longest hour of my life, because I had no idea, like anybody else, but it was 435 guys watching this with the guards. It was a movie-made deal, but again, survived it, went forward, and it was a very strange concept for prison.
Yeah, that would have been a very weird experience, not having any idea how that was going to play out or what they're going to see while they're watching it, and you're just sitting there next to them all.
Yeah, strange.
Well, Brent, we didn't get to talk about a few things I wanted to today, but perhaps we can catch it on a future episode. But before we wrap up today's episode, what social media profiles, business of yours, etc., would you like to plug for the audience to go out and follow to learn more about you?
Okay, so my website is brentcassity.com. Just remember, I spell it wrong, even though I wanted to be Sean and David Cassidy growing up. I spell it with an ITY. You can find me on Instagram, Brent Cassity. Easy to find on Facebook. It's all Brent Cassity. Go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart to get the book Nightmare Success, and check out the Nightmare Success podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and you guys better go follow him because he did go to prison. So
Exactly.
Brent, Eric is not here anymore because he actually had to step out for a meeting. That's all the time we have for today. However, the St. Louis podcast will be back next week at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time with a new episode, new guest, and unfortunately more of your host, Eric Brown, and myself, Garrett Atkins. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching live or later and we said something wrong, said something you hate, or said something you want to hear more about, you can visit us at stlouispodcast.com and leave us a message telling us all about it. Finally, this episode was recorded at Half Coast Studios in St. Louis, Missouri. If you're looking to start a podcast or take your current podcast to the next level, whether you're local to St. Louis or walking on the Great Wall of China, reach out to them at halfcoaststudios.com. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Brent. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and we'll see you again next week at Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, St. Louis. Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our sponsor, Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee. Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance is recruiting agency owners here in St. Louis.
That's right, Garrett, and everyone knows what Farmers Insurance is, and if they don't, they will now.
Yes, it's kind of a household name. That said, as many of you know, a large part of our audience is made up of badass business owners, entrepreneurs, and top producing sales professionals with an open mind like yourself. Farmers Insurance is currently searching for driven individuals who aspire to own their own business or already own their own business and want to add another income stream to join the Farmers Insurance brand and own their own insurance agency.
This is a stellar opportunity to build your own insurance agency from scratch, take over an existing agency, or if you're just a slow roller, we know you the guys out there and ladies, get paid to train under an existing successful agency owner before starting your own.
Holy shit, Eric. That means that whether you have experience as a business owner or you've never heard the word business before in your life, there's a pathway to owning your own business through Farmers Insurance Agency led by Mark Lee.
That's right. You can become a Farmers Insurance business owner even if you've been homeless in the past, just like you.
Yeah, thanks.
If you've ever dreamt of being your own boss, building a team under a reputable brand, and making a difference in your community by offering top-tier auto, home, and commercial insurance to consumers and businesses in your area, Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the godlike man himself, Mark Lee, has the perfect opportunity for you.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com to speak with Mark Lee, the district manager of Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, to become a Farmers Insurance Agency owner today.
Did you hear that, St. Louis? Go visit insurancecareerstl.com. Insurancecareerstl.com. That is INSURANCE, career, CAREERSTL.com.
To become a business owner today, again, one more time, visit insurancecareerstl, as in St. Louis.com today. Right now, this second, or reach out to us at stlouispodcast.com and we'll introduce you to Mark Lee ourselves. And I promise he won't spell out insurance and career to you.